Let's begin. So good afternoon and welcome to today's event. I hope you're all having a good day. The Engineers Ireland Inclusion and Diversity Group was originally founded in 2019 to support Engineers Ireland in examining matters concerning diversity, by which we mean differences both seen and unseen, and inclusion, by which we mean creating an environment in which people are valued, feel valued and are able to achieve and contribute to their full potential. Engineers Ireland has a membership of work of continuing professional development accredited employers. Amongst the aims of the Inclusion and Diversity Group is to promote addressing the needs of diverse demographic, social, economic and cultural groups. And if you've been listening to the Irish radio in recent months, you may well have heard about the National Human Rights Strategy for Disabled People 2025 to 2030, which is a strategy in Ireland. The Centre for Excellence in Universal Design is dedicated to enabling the design of environments that can be accessed, understood and used regardless of a person's age, size, ability or disability. They promote best practice, develop guidelines and contribute to national and European standards. They also deliver continuous professional development and promote universal design in education, providing people with practical and advice on how to ensure society is as inclusive as possible. And today it is my pleasure to introduce Dan Eames, who is a digital design advisor, and Rachel McMahon, who's an education design advisor, who are giving today's presentation. So I shall hand over.
As I said, I'm Rachel McMahon and I'm the education design advisor here at the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design. And myself and my colleague Dan, who's the digital design advisor, will be co-presenting this first webinar in a series. So the first webinar is Universal Design in Engineering, and it'll be part of a 4-part series on inclusive society. So just a little note on the Centre first. The Centre for Excellence in Universal Design, or the CEUD, is dedicated to developing and promoting universal design across 4 pillars. And these pillars are digital, built environment, products and services, and education. And the Centre is part of the National Disability Authority, or the NDA. And then, as I mentioned then, so this is the first webinar in a 4-part series, and then the other 3 will be in 2026, so next year. And it'll be universal design on different areas. So the first one will be mechanical engineering, and then another in transport, and then finally universal design in aviation. And then just to keep an eye on the Engineers Ireland website for more details on these. So the agenda for this one then, will start with an introduction to universal design. We'll then move on to universal design as it applies to engineering, and then look at the 7 principles of universal design. And then Dan will take over and look at language use, and then finally onto the tools and takeaways. So first, what is universal design? Universal design is the design or the composition of an environment so that it can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible by all people, regardless of their age, size, ability, or disability, and also without a need for adaptation or assistive devices or specialized solutions. So the World Health Organization reports that there's too much focus placed on special supports rather than on inclusion and equity. So a shift is needed then to move from accessibility towards universal design. And the key difference between universal design and accessibility is that while accessibility provides basic access and usability of facilities, products, and services for people with disabilities, universal design aims to create products and services that are usable by as many people as possible to the greatest extent possible without needing adaptation. Also, universal design can be also called inclusive design. And this is in line and it supports the goal of the Diversity and Inclusion Society to foster an inclusive culture and ensure that everyone feels that sense of belonging throughout Engineers Ireland and within the engineering community. As every design decision then has the potential to either include or exclude people, a quote that we like here at the Centre is that good design enables, whereas bad design disables. and you might recognize the social model or human model rights of disability in that. So then why should we design for everyone? Over 1 billion people worldwide have some form of disability. The number of older people as well in Western countries is steadily increasing. And then looking at this from a business point of view, most companies don't consider these market segments, and this could result in a potential loss of market of nearly 20%. Taking a universal design approach then solves for one but extends to many. And what we mean by this is that universal design assumes that everybody experiences barriers, reduced functioning, or some form of disability, and that might be permanent, temporary, or situational at some point in their lives. So a benefit of universal design then is that if you design for someone with a disability, your design will automatically include this wider range of people. And in this illustration, is an example where we see someone with one arm, another person with a temporary arm injury, and then another person carrying a baby. So designing for someone with one arm, all of these other people automatically benefit. It's also really important to think about the link between aging and disability. And in this graph, we can see, this is from the Housing Commission report, and it shows data based on Census 2022, and it looks at the prevalence of disability with increasing age. So on the x-axis is age, and this is increasing from left to right, and then on the y-axis is the prevalence of disability. And the graph shows a significant increase in disability as we age. So with this correlation in mind, then taking a universal design approach is designing for our future selves. And also underscoring the importance of this link is our aging population. So in July last year, the CSO issued a set of population projections for Ireland for the period between 2023 and 2057. And it showed that the percentage of the population aged over 65 is projected to increase significantly. So it would be going from 15% in Census 2022 up to 31% depending on different scenarios by 2057. So this would clearly demonstrate then this increasing demand for universal designed products, services, and spaces in the coming years. So supporting universal design and its principles are human-centered approaches and systems approaches. With these approaches being the foundation, then this double diamond model for design illustrates the journey across 4 key phases, and these key phases are discover, define, develop, and deliver. In the first phase, which is discover, the focus is on understanding the challenge and the people affected. Phase 2, then, the define phase, refines this problem to identify the specific challenge. Phase 3, develop, and this is where the ideas are formulated. And then finally, phase 4 is deliver, and this is where a prototype is tested and further refined. A key part of taking a universal design approach is to identify lead users, and these are the people with a higher level of need. And it's thought that if we design them to meet their needs and preferences, will automatically improve the experiences of many other users. So in order to meet the needs of the widest range of users, we need to prioritize users with the more diverse abilities and characteristics. When conducting user research or testing, then it's important to oversample the tails of the distribution curve to ensure the inclusion of those with the edge case experiences. We'd also promote the involvement of users in the design process, and this is a key part of the universal design approach. So this helps us to think about the world not just from the standpoint of the average or normal user, but from the extremes. Looking now at the systems approach, this is a human ecological approach, and it recognizes that the many layers of our environment which influence our development. And these are 3 layers or levels are outlined here. That's macro, meso, and micro. And at the macro level, this is about the establishment of policies and legislation. It's about developing standards, promoting awareness, and ensuring that its adoption at national and local levels. The meso level then is the level of the institution, and it includes governance, policies, and procedures. And then finally, the micro level, this is the level of the individual, and it might include things like training and support or resources and toolkits. So at the macro level, then, there's a number of key pieces in legislation and guidelines. And here we can see the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, 2008. And this contains several articles that relate to accessibility and universal design. So Article 9, firstly, relates to accessibility of the physical environment, transportation, information and communications, facilities and services. Article 4 looks at research and development of universally designed goods. Article 20 is about personal mobility and assistive technology. And then Article 21 on information in accessible formats and technologies. Another one then is the European Accessibility Act, or the EAA, and this came into effect on the 28th of June of this year. It's applicable to both public and private sectors, and its aims are to increase the availability of accessible products and services across the EU. It also aims to ensure that accessibility requirements are consistently applied to the manufacturing and sale of certain products and services. Now looking at standards, there are two. Here on the side, we've outlined two key European standards, and these are ones that we're actively working on, and they're connected to the EAA. The first is Design for All, EN 17161, and the second is Accessibility Requirements for ICT Products and Services, which is known as EN 301549. So Design for All, then, EN 17161, is about using a universal design approach at all levels in organizations to continuously improve and manage the accessibility and usability of the products and services they provide. Accessibility requirements for ICT products and services, then, this sets guidelines for digital accessibility, including for people with disabilities. And then on the right, then, is just a process for standards. So we're involved in this process, and every standard goes through this. Still at the macro level, looking now at Irish policy and strategies, we have firstly the Disability Act 2005, and this is where the centre, the CEUD, began in January 2007 following the enactment of this act. And then some strategies include the National Human Rights Strategy for Disabled People 2025 to 2030, and then the Action Plan for Designing Better Public Services. We know that there are three common drivers or motivators for universal design. The first one is about social inclusion and human rights. It's the idea that people have a right to be included in society, that it's part of equality legislation. The next refers to the benefits of universal design for sustainability. It results in better designs for everyone and for the planet. And then finally, that universal design makes good business sense as it increases the amount of users or customers. So now I'd really like to hear what motivates you. Okay, if we have time at the end, we can look back on this. But it looks like most of you would consider human rights or the sustainability as the key motivators, and this seems to be fairly consistent across these kinds of webinars. That seems to be the most pressing driver. So thank you for that. I'll just get back to our presentation. So then beginning the third part, this is universal design in engineering. So taking a closer look at this. The Centre for Excellence in Universal Design encourages training in universal design for all those involved in training or education courses for people either preparing to engage or already engaged in work that affects the environment. In this, then, universal design should be in the assessment as well as in the learning content of these courses. And we note as well that Engineers Ireland has incorporated universal design into its most recent accreditation criteria, specifically in Programme Area 4, where it states that students should have an understanding of the application of universal design as the design and composition of an environment so that it can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible by all people, regardless of their age, size, ability, or disability. An environment or any building, product, or service in that environment should be designed to meet the needs of all people who wish to use it. The inclusion of universal design ensures that you need to demonstrate the inclusion of universal design in their content and assessment. And so this is a really big step forward in recognising universal design as an intrinsic part of a student's learning and assessment. So then moving on to the 7 universal design principles. There are 7 of them, and each of them have related guidelines as well. So we can check these out on our website, universaldesign.ie, but we'll go into them now with relation to engineering. They're really useful. So if you want to make sure that your design is usable, like we said, by the greatest number of people possible. The principles are equitable use, flexible use, simple and intuitive use, perceptible information, tolerance for error, low physical effort, and size and space for use. So we'll go into each of these now. The first one is equitable use. This means that the design is usable by people with diverse abilities, and it includes providing information, products, and services in formats accessible for a broad range of abilities. A really good example of this one is Beyond the Trees at Avondale Forest Park. It won the RIAI Universal Design Award in 2023. So what it has is, for one thing, it has an elevated path that forms a treetop walk, which is set in a forest in Wicklow. And there's step-free access throughout, so all pathways are either gently sloped or they have a ramp, meaning that people with reduced mobility can experience it and get to the top just like everyone else. And this is really important to avoid as well stigmatization. So this is that all people can use the same walkway as in the example shown here in the image. And having different solutions for users with disabilities can make them feel different to others, which is obviously something we want to avoid. And at its best, we think of universal design as being invisible, so that it considers more than just being able to access the environment or product or service, but it's about how it makes you feel as well. Principle 2 then is flexible use. And this means that the design accommodates a wide range of individual preferences and abilities. For instance, it provides a choice to read or to listen to content, a range of seating options, and safe and usable shared spaces. The example in the image here is from the Central Bank of Ireland, where the CEUD has an e-learning course on it actually. So pictured here is an informal breakout area. This area is designed to encourage collaboration in the workplace, and it's less formal than a separate meeting room. You can see maybe that there are different types of seating provided, so that you can choose from a seat. You can choose your seat based on your preference at that time. There are tables with chairs and also more relaxed seating at the sofa as well. To accommodate ability with seating, then it's a really good idea to provide some seating with back and arm rests, as some people can find it difficult to move from sitting to standing without that support. Also, visual contrast between the chair and its background is helpful to someone with low vision who can then locate it more easily. In this photo, you might also just be able to see a difference in the surface of the flooring as well. So the white tiling in the bottom left corner is used on all the circulation routes of the building, and that contrasts then with the wooden floorboards of this breakout area. This change in floor surface then is both visual and tactile contrasted. It's also just important to note then that the range of seating shouldn't obstruct the circulation space. Principle 3 is simple and intuitive, and this means that the use of the design is easy to understand, regardless of the user's experience, knowledge, language skills, or current concentration level. For this principle, you might think about a time when you tried to navigate around an unfamiliar place or use a product or service for the first time. An example of this is using the Leap card, where a user can tag on and tag off at a bus, train, or Lewis in Dublin by tapping their card on a machine. To demonstrate this principle, the design of the Leap card and its app need to ensure that navigation is clear, so they might use simple menus, consistent icons, and intuitive layouts to ensure that the most important information is easy to find. Also using plain language, so this is using simple, clear words and phrases in instructions and wayfinding. Principle 4 then is perceptible information. This means that the design communicates necessary information effectively to the user, regardless of ambient conditions or the learner's sensory abilities. Good practice with this one involves using a variety of modes, such as visual, auditory, or tactile, and providing adequate contrast and maximizing the legibility of essential information. A really good example of this principle is our winning entry in the Universal Design Grand Challenge 2025. The student was Leah Shanahan, and her product was called Amy. The product and Leah won 2 awards this year. One was the Products and Services Award, and the other was the People's Choice. I believe she's also nominated in the Irish Times 30 under 30 as well. So it's a really great product. It's called Amy. It's an accessible pregnancy test. It's designed for blind or visually impaired women. So currently, blind and visually impaired women need to ask someone to tell them the results of their test, impacting obviously their privacy and their autonomy. Amy, the product, restores this independence by using 3 senses to communicate the results. It uses touch, sight, and sound. For touch, then, there's a raised plus or minus sign on the reusable reader that allows users to feel the result. They can also tap a phone against the test, and that will bring them to a private web page where there's a bold red or green visual and large, high contrast text for users with partial vision. The web page is also text-to-speech compatible, which allows users to have the results read out loud if they prefer. And it was developed through in-depth user interviews, simulation testing, and iterative prototyping. Amy embraces universal design principles to ensure that information is perceptible regardless of sensory abilities. So the 5th principle is tolerance for error, and this means that the design minimizes hazards and the adverse consequences of unintended actions. It could do this by providing clear instructions and offering accessible navigation. And an example of this one is outdoor adventure centres like centre parks. Here, you can imagine it's very important to prevent unconscious action in tasks that require vigilance. So, for example, they could have clear stop and go signals. Also, providing specific clothing requirements and regulations, such as using sports shoes instead of open-toe shoes and no jewellery allowed, and so on. The 6th principle of universal design is low physical effort. This means that the design can be used efficiently and comfortably with minimum fatigue, and it includes creating environments, products, and services that are physically easy for all users to engage with, ensuring physical accessibility and reducing unnecessary exertion. An example of this one is looking at the Central Bank of Ireland again. So as well as the lifts pictured here, which obviously are important for people who can't use the stairs, you might be able to see on the left side there are doors that are designed with hold open devices. So typically for fire doors, they're quite heavy. They require strength to push open, and that won't show up on a floor plan typically, for instance. But it can be a real barrier for people with reduced upper body strength. Or if you're pushing a trolley or carrying something, for example, it can be really difficult to use the fire door. So in the central bank, they have these hold open devices, which means that the door stays open basically, and it reduces the need for physical effort. Another example of low physical effort principle is distance, and it's something that's often overlooked. It's so the photo here is from a colleague, actually. It's a picture of her local park, and what she wanted to convey in this image was the importance of having rest spaces. So in this image, you might just be able to make out the bench along the path on the left center, but maybe not. But the idea is that for older people or people with reduced mobility or stamina, that they know that there's a place that they can rest if they go for a walk. So looking at this principle, then the impact of distance on people with reduced stamina can be huge. Having a bench or a place to sit down and rest along a path is really critical for people to be able to get out and about. This photo also, yeah, it illustrates the shared routes. So it's this path you can see maybe the bike tracks in the gravel, but it's used by both cyclists and pedestrians. And so awareness of each other is really important. This is especially important for people who are blind or for older people who might be unsteady on their feet. And then the last principle is principle 7, size and space. For this, appropriate size and space is provided for approach, reach, manipulation, and use, regardless of the user's body size, posture, or mobility. And the image here is of our kitchenette in the open plan at the CEUD offices in Ballsbridge. And you can see that there's knee room under the sink and countertop. There's a difference in floor surfaces and texture and color contrast in the floor as well. So generous, clear circulation routes are really important for people using mobility devices, people who are blind or have low vision, and people who are carrying crates or equipment or things like this. Circulation routes, as we mentioned before, need to be free of obstacles to allow people to move around easily. Just more generally then, when considering dimensions and measurements, we typically use a user of a large motorized wheelchair as our lead user, but it's also important generally for people pushing buggies, carrying shopping, wheeling luggage, or using a backpack, people providing support for another person, or holding hands with a child. Also people with autism, people with assistance, dogs, all of these would need a wider footpath than someone who would use a wheelchair. So it's important to think of these as the lead user as well. Another Irish example is St. Mel's Cathedral in Longford. This was built between 1840 and 1893, but it was severely damaged. And in the fire, the interior of the building, the roof, the timber floors, they're all completely destroyed. Fitzgerald, Kavanagh and Partners were tasked then with restoring the cathedral, but they also had the opportunity to improve its access. Alongside the steps to the main entrance, there's a ramp for better access. And part of the improvements also included decreasing the reverberation within the cathedral. This was a particular issue for congregants, as many would be older people and they wouldn't, they might be hearing loss and things like this, so reverberation would only exacerbate that. However, feedback that was gathered from congregants found that entirely removing the reverberation made it feel less like a cathedral. So the sound engineers went back in and they reduced almost all of the reverberation, reducing it to almost 10% or something like this, to retain that cathedral feel, which I thought was interesting. So as well as winning the RII Architecture Awards, it won the Irish Building and Design Awards 2015, Building Project of the Year and Interior Architectural Project of the Year. There's a number of universal design principles evident here, and they include equitable use, perceptible information, and size and space. So here I'd ask if you'd like just to think of a design fail or design success that you know of. It might be a product, service, space, technology that you think hasn't been designed well, and maybe that could do with a redesign, taking a universal design approach. Or if you can think of, or if you've encountered a poorly designed product, service, or space, or something that's designed really well. And again, on slido.com, this time the code is 6487 and 314, or you can scan the QR code. So the code is, again, 6487 314. And I'll just give a moment for that.
I think with the first question we were a bit short on time for people to respond, so we might actually leave this question running while we continue the rest of the presentation, but we can see some answers coming in there now anyways.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, it's always interesting to hear about people's personal experience with uh, what they consider good design. We've been given as well of design fails. So in the top left, then it's an image of zigzagging ramps leading up to the front door of a house, and you can see how unappealing that is. Then underneath that is a ramp that begins with two steps, which makes no sense, obviously. And then the middle image is a carpeted staircase with a pattern that makes it difficult to distinguish the end of each step. In the top right, there's a DIY solution to simplify the controls for a TV and DVD player. And the solution is to put tape over the buttons that are rarely used. The image underneath then is two almost identical bottles with medicines for very different purposes. One bottle is labeled relax and sleep, and the other is colon cleanser. So with that, I'll pass to my colleague Dan, and he'll look at language use.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Rachel, and it's lovely to speak to everyone today. My name is Dan, yeah, and we can jump into minding your language. So Rachel mentioned the UNCRPD earlier, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. This very much sets out a move away from the medical approach to disability and towards the social or human rights approach. So the medical approach would have viewed disability as an individual's problem. It's something to be fixed. It's an inherent issue, while the social model, which we promote through the CEUD, also looks at disability as the result of societal barriers. So it's the disability is brought on by the environment rather than the individual. We go to the next slide. So that also sets the scene for setting out our inclusive language and why this matters. So language shapes the design world and the engineered world, so products and services, and therefore this shapes who can access them. If we have more inclusive, accessible language, we can drive better, clearer design requirements in our projects. And it's essential for public sector compliance. And if anyone is going through the procurement processes, you need to make sure that you're using inclusive language. And at the base of all of this, it builds respect for the user and avoids bias. So there's a couple of standards that address accessibility. The main one being ISO Guide 71. So that is an international standard. There's also a European standard, which is called Sensenelec Guide 6. These are actually pretty much the same one. They've been transposed from one to the other. So the guidelines are pretty much the same, whether you want to access them at an international or European level. And they provide guidance on addressing accessibility requirements in standards that focus on systems, products, services, and built environments. So typical for standards, they can be kind of wordy documents, but the useful things in these two or in this one across both of them is that there is a summary of the most current and appropriate terminology relating to disability. There is a list of accessibility goals, which can be used to identify user accessibility needs. And it also contains descriptions and design considerations for the different types of human abilities and characteristics. So there's a link there, and we'll be providing this document afterwards, so you can access those links. So for engineers in their work, what are some practical principles or examples? Well, we would just say to use neutral, respectful terms, avoid things like maybe suffers from or normal users, or maybe a traditional thing to say would be wheelchair bound, but we wouldn't say that. We would say wheelchair user. Also, focus on functional requirements in documentation, procurement, project outlines. focus on the functional requirements and not assumptions about the ability of the people who may or may not be using it. We encourage people to describe tasks and conditions and prioritize that. So an example there would be controls must be reachable rather than putting in a first or second person saying someone needs to or can't or something like this. We would say the controls should be reachable. Also, across all of documents and your own collateral, we would encourage to keep terminology consistent across these and up to date, I guess. And also to reference the standards previously mentioned. We also do in the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design and the NDA, which is our kind of parent organization, we have a language report on it goes through the social model of language. So we can also link to that. Yeah, we can go on to the next slide. I'm thinking we probably don't have much time to go into this slide, so we might skip this one for now. But a persona is kind of a tool that you can use to build out an understanding of your user, and it can be quite helpful in the design process. So just considering making up some details about a fictional user and creating some considerations around them and trying to implement accessible language. But like I said, we won't go into this last slide out today. Just in our last section then, I'll reiterate some of the tools that we've gone through, or I might also make reference to a few new ones. So the first one here is, I think, the Customer Communications Toolkit for services to the public. This is different to public services. It's for any service to the public. It's a toolkit that can help you with your written communications, spoken or signed communications, and digital communications, and how it includes things about accessibility in the web, accessible documents, accessible language is also included in there. So there's a QR code for this one specifically, but we'll also provide a link. And this is also available on our website, and we have a digital and communication section. Also in the digital and communication section of our website, and there's a link for this one here as well, is our web accessibility techniques. This is a suite of techniques that we have built. It's guidelines based on things like WCAG, which is the EN 301549 standard is there. So we've kind of brought across code snippets, references, definitions, and guidelines around those, and they also align with the European Accessibility Act. So we've broken down the web accessibility techniques into advice for designers or engineers or architects or anyone who's in the business of designing or making. And content providers is also a section, and then also we have a section for developers. Another tool that we can, or guidelines that we can provide, we have built out a human body size guide. So this is worldwide and regional design ranges for use in product standards. So this is the only national data set for Ireland, so it gives the range of sizes for Irish people, covering things from arm length, height, width, different types of grips, and different things like rotation and stuff like that. So that's also available on our website and may be helpful in project work. And lastly, this is our Building for Everyone. It's a universal design approach document that's broken down into 10 different categories, specifically relating to universal design in the built environment. This is quite a fleshed out guidelines on our website. We will be covering more of this type of resource in our future webinars in this series, but this one is probably our main one. It provides a comprehensive best practice guidance on how to design, how to build, and how to manage buildings and spaces so that they can be readily accessed and used by everyone. So yeah, we do have a lot more resources on our website. Those were just a taster of a couple. We can close out that section now just with a little quote from Victor Papanek. The only important thing about design is how it relates to people. So kind of just relating back to the start of the presentation, we are taking a universal design approach, but it is also a human-centered design approach, and we kind of relate that to all of our the guidelines and tools and resources that we provide. And if you'd like to get in contact with us, all of the resources that I've mentioned, the resources that we've created, they're available on universaldesign.ie. We're also quite active on LinkedIn, so you can follow us there. And we've recently set up a Blue Sky account, which is an alternative to X or to Twitter, and we're getting more active there. So we will post about other public webinars, other events. I know yesterday was the International Day for People with Disabilities, so we had quite a bit of content to share about that. That's a big one in our calendar. So yeah, we encourage anyone to reach out. And I think, yeah, we do also have an announcement to make in that we are welcoming the 8th International Universal Design Conference to Galway next year. So that will be around this time, 4th to the 6th of November 2026 in Galway City. And we'll be welcoming delegates from all around the world to meet and talk and network over universal design topics. So that is hosted by ourselves and by the University of Galway. If you have any interest, if you want to be involved or attend, indeed, there's a contact there. You can email ud26@nda.ie. So I think at this point, we're quite happy to break out into some questions and answers.